Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Virtual Global Leadership Podcast. Today we have a remarkable guest who is a true pioneer in the realm of virtual work and learning. She defines herself as a virtual enthusiast, a researcher by education, a speaker by passion, and an author by results. We have Dr. Barbara. Throughout her illustrious career, she has cultivated profound passion for exploring new ways of working and learning, positive leadership, and overall organization culture. Her expertise has taken her around the world, where she has delivered numerous keynote speeches, conducted transformative workshops, and provided invaluable training to individuals and organizations alike. Since 2010, Dr. Barbara has been tirelessly working to bridge the global divide and train professional teams and business in virtual and hybrid environments. Her efforts have directly impacted over 5,000 individuals, equipping them with the skills and knowledge to thrive in today's dynamic landscape. Today, Dr. Barbara continues to support individuals, teams, and businesses of all sizes in harnessing the power of virtual and hybrid organizations. Her goal is to help these organizations attract top talent from across the globe and empower them to work together effectively and successfully, regardless of geographical boundaries. So, get ready to be inspired by our insights and expertise as we delve into the fascinating world of virtual work and learning with our esteemed guest, Dr. Barbara. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi there, Saga. Thank you very much for the invitation. And well, I'm doing fantastic. It's great to be on your show.
Thank you. You're most welcome. So, how do you see the future of work evolving, especially in terms of remote and flexible work arrangements?
I do see, as many of us, that particularly since the pandemic, since 2020, there was really a huge shift in what people were able to see is possible. And well, I've been working around new ways of working, the framework of new ways of working and virtual work for over 10 years now. And I did see, of course, with 2020 happening, with the pandemic happening, that there was an increase of awareness, a tremendous shift, and really a fast also change of mindset in many organizations. So I do think people recognize the power and the power of hybrid or virtual work setups and what it means for people's private lives, the work life harmony, as I like to use the word harmony, and also what it means for the well-being of everyone. So I do see that we are moving towards more flexibility, more autonomy, even though in some organizations we see those return to office mandates. But we also see, on the other hand, that this is not really working, because just recently, even though people were mandated back to the office, half of the workforce just resigned, right? Because people need and want to have and do not want to not have anymore the flexibility of choosing where and when to work from, if it is possible within their jobs.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that perspective. So, can you share some tips or suggestions for creating meaningful interactions in virtual team meetings?
You're bringing up an important topic, because what we have seen is that since 2020, people were really struggling to connect in a meaningful way online, no, in their online meetings, in their online team encounters, or even asynchronously via the communication channel that the organization has implemented. So I do believe that one of the most important things is that we are clear about how, as a team leader or as an organization, what channels we're using and how we want to foster team bonding and social connection. So, of course, we do know that in a virtual work setup or in any kind of work setup, we have asynchronous or synchronous communication tools. Synchronous meaning at the same time, in the same place, like we're doing it now, communicating on video here, versus asynchronous meaning that we are not doing it at the same time. So, for example, it can be a communication channel like Slack or Microsoft Teams channel where we exchange messages at different times, which allows for freedom, flexibility, and time autonomy, right? So these two channels, these two sort of ways of communication, we do have them, and we also need to use them in order to create team effectiveness and social bonding. In an asynchronous way, what we like to suggest to our clients when we work with them is to think about a channel that is only for social messages, check-ins, fun picture challenges, or maybe some video challenges or videos that you share that is about yourself, that helps people, your team colleagues, to get to know you better, and also create through different interactions that sense of team cohesion.
Hmm.
Asynchronous communication. What in many teams we're doing is that we have a channel like WhatsApp or a dedicated Slack channel established where you talk every Monday, every Wednesday about certain topics. Like, for example, I have an organization that I work with that on Monday is the day where they share their workplace setup, where they are working from this week. On Tuesday, they share something differently. And that's how you trigger that people communicate about themselves, about their work setups. They share something more than only work um, in order to create that connection. Asynchronous communication channels. If we are talking about synchronous communication channels, we do know that most experts about virtual meetings, they always recommend that you dedicate at least the first few minutes to do a social check-in in your meetings. That doesn't need to be long, depending on how big the team meeting size is, of course, and also how well the team knows each other. That can be really small activities through the chat, through an emoji reaction, or a longer activity if we use breakout rooms if it's necessary, for example. But we should always create that space to socially connect and check in with the colleagues as well. And I think this is important. Beyond these regular check ins, we always recommend that a company, even though it's a fully virtual company, considers off-site team retreats, like that they really meet at some point in a destination where they really try to come together. And also, when creating those retreats, when designing those retreats, it's important to consider that it should be 70% social and not 70% work and presentations. It's rather a social event than a work event. And I think these are different ways on how you can consistently and meaningfully create connection in a remote first work environment.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. We have received a comment from one of our viewers, and he said he believes that there is an impression that organizations are scared promoting asynchronous communication, and then they're going for tons of meetings instead. So this is the comment. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Oliver. I see your comment and I feel you. And I also have the impression that it's still difficult for organizations to embrace asynchronous communication because they feel it cannot be personal, because they feel it's only an email. So I think it needs a change in mindset, but also a change in the way how we communicate via email, how we communicate via a Slack channel that is a rather, let's say, a boring channel. It's not a very personal channel, but you can make it personal through the ways that through the way that you're using it. And I think this is very important to consider. But indeed, I think it really needs still a very strong mindset shift there, so that people and organizations can really embrace it.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. So, what are some of the benefits of organizing virtual events for small groups, and how can they be made engaging and productive?
Yeah. So I think when we deliver virtual events, it must be our mindset needs to shift, because very often we do see virtual events as something that we are replicating from an on-site setup. So like as we were doing it in the office, we are shifting it to a virtual space. But for example, company-wide virtual events need much more to be rethought, like really as an entertaining, as a production, as something that needs even much more attention to what you're doing compared to an in-presence to an in-presence event. Why? Because we do see that in the virtual space, our attention has dropped, the attention span has dropped, our attention and the way how we work in the virtual space changed. And that's why we need to think from the very first moment that we start designing the virtual event onwards. We need to think about how can we make it a real, like a cast, like a broadcast, like a really big event that almost remembers you a little bit about a stage, like a TV or something. Meaning that you need to create very, very clear checkpoints as well on when you check in with your audience and you interact and engage with your audience all the time. What do we see very often? In virtual events, it happens very often that producers start a virtual event, and they start it by having people talk, or one person talk, or two people talk during like 10-15 minutes. What is happening? If you start a company wide virtual event with the president or the HR manager or the CFO or whoever talking for 10-15 minutes, you prime your audience and you prime your participants to not participate because they will be primed to listen. So that
Hmm.
means that what we do when we consult and when we work with companies on how to produce a big company event, we always think about interaction from the very first moment on. And interaction doesn't mean that everybody needs to speak up, because, of course, in a company-wide event that we organized, I think it was 3 weeks ago, there were like 600 people. So impossible that everybody speaks up. But still, you always have the possibility to use emoji reactions, to use the chat reactions, to use the chat button, the chat box, so that people can provide a guess. You can make it a game. You can make it just a quick comment. You can make it a fun question about where they are connecting, what shoes they are wearing, whatever. In Microsoft Teams, which is nice, what we very often use is we use the gifs in the chat, that you can also search for gifs about how they are feeling, and that something brings like really fun gifs, and everybody sort of gets in the mood of, well, I'm contributing, even though it's just by a chat. That doesn't matter. Of
Hmm.
course, beyond the platform inherent tools, you always have polling tools, external platforms like Aha Slides, Slido, Mentimeter, that you can use to create a memorable output. So, for example, if it is about something that you want to brainstorm on or know how people are feeling about a company wide change, you could use Mentimeter and save in a word cloud the feelings that people are associating with that change. And those are all small things, but they need to be considered from the very, very first moment on when you're designing such a virtual event for your company.
Yep, yep. Thank you, Dr. Barbara, for sharing that. I would like to know your perspective on new ways of learning, and what are some of the best practices for designing and implementing in organizations?
Um, Thanks so much. Also, this question is very intriguing because virtual learning or hybrid learning or blended learning is something that we have been researching, that I have been researching for over 10 years.
Yep.
But it has experienced a huge shift, of course, since 2020. And it's really interesting because if I look at universities, I was working for a long time as a university researcher, and what we were seeing is always that the e-learning departments, they were super undervalued and understaffed. And of course, now since 2020, they really, most of them really got a good budget. The lecture halls were really set up also for a virtual or a hybrid classroom, and that really was a game changer. When it comes to learning in general, whether higher education or whether it is in private organization or NGOs, I think one important aspect is also here that learners need to have choice. They need to have choice to learn as they like to learn, as it fits into their work schedule, but also in their work schedule, but also in their private lives. And I think this is important, which of course means that you need to have not only live sessions that are happening at a certain point in time, but that you need to have on demand content that people can access when it best fits their schedule. And that means having videos online, having podcasts that you're sharing, having files that they can read through or case studies that people can emerge in. And I think this is important to consider when we talk about the future of learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Choice, autonomy, but also this again here needs, in my opinion, an upskilling in learning learning skills. Why? Because very often in organization that I work with, we have the HR department preparing trainings. The participants come to the training for a day, they participate, but then they go back and nothing really happens. The moment that employees, learners need to organize and sort of follow up on the content, on the learning process themselves, they need to know how to do that. They need to learn how to do that. So I believe that it's very important to upskill on that self-directed learning or autonomy learning, in a way that also helps your audience, your people, to dive into the material that you prepare. Otherwise, it's just e-learnings or videos that are online somewhere and nobody is watching. And that also happened. I had a very, very big project last year about hybrid meetings. It was uploaded to the client's learning management system, and I checked in with them 3 months later, and 10 people viewed the course. Why? Because they are not really used to virtual learning, and
Hmm.
the organization didn't do anything to support them in terms of what I really like to advise always is, if I use micro learning videos, what I always do is I have an accompanying process. So often it is accompanied by peer groups, by working out loud circles or learning out loud circles, or it is accompanied by a coaching process, which makes the whole video learning process much, much, much more valuable. And through the peer circles, of course, you can have, and what you're doing is you're embedding a social learning element. And social learning is a very, very powerful tool, particularly if we are in an online micro learning context.
Thank you for sharing a detailed perspective that really helps us. So, Barbara, I would like to know more about Virtual Space Hero. Like, when was this started? And it would be great if you could share, what is the vision, goal, and what do you see? Where are you heading? I would love to know that.
Yeah, well, Virtual Space Hero started in 2019 when I left academia. So I studied in 2010 a job in Vienna as a professor at the Department of Human Resources and Organizational Development. And I became a researcher of new ways of working. So my specialty, I was really focusing on new ways of working, new ways of learning, and what are success factors for organizations in those two areas. Um, in 2018, I finished my PhD. And in 2019, I became a visiting professor in Spain. And that is when I fell in love with the country. I fell in love with the people. I was living in Spain and Latin America before, so I knew the culture. And that is when I decided, well, it was 10 years at the same place, even though with always different tasks. But I was clear that I wanted to change. And the change was leaving academia and starting my own business, because that was the only way that I can stay in this fully remote environment. When in 2019 I was a fully remote worker because my team was in Vienna and I was in Spain. I realized how much freedom and flexibility they gave me. Even though I was researching it before, I was only in a hybrid work setup with an allowance of 2 remote work days per month. So of course, from two remote work days per week. Sorry. So from 2 remote work days or home working days per week to 5 days that I can choose where and when I work. It was such a difference. It was a game changer for me. And that is also the reason why I started Virtual Space Hero. And Virtual Space Hero is about enabling and supporting teams to shift and organizations to shift the mindset from this in office mandate to becoming also virtual enthusiasts. Why? Because for me, working as a fully remote worker opened up so many possibilities for me personally, but also for me as a mom, as an entrepreneur, as a wife, as a family member. It changed really everything.
Wow. Do you feel that you working with a company helped you start something of your own? Did the remote first experience helped you be at what you are doing today?
Well, I think, of course, it did because I was already a new ways of working researcher. So I knew all the theory. I knew what were the challenges behind new ways of working, behind remote work. I experienced it myself for over 10 years. I think it was over 10 years that I was working in a hybrid setup. So where I was working from home, but also from the office. And just in 2019, it was really when I was able to work fully remote. And that is when I also experienced that big, big difference that it even makes from a good hybrid setup to becoming a fully remote worker. And that was like really, really game changing. So, what we do here at Virtual Space Hero is we provide organizations keynotes, workshops, consulting on the topic on how to foster a great remote first culture, on how to become a remote first employer, a virtual with great policies in place that do not hinder social interaction, but that they foster a team cohesion and employee well-being and productivity across the organization.
Wow. So what has been the trend post pandemic? Like how it has been? What do you see? Companies behavior towards adapting to this particular way of working.
Well, as we discussed at the beginning, I think that many companies, for many organizations, it opened up a lot of possibilities and they became aware of that. But as we see, there are a lot of return to office mandates because of the challenge that companies are struggling with empty offices and with leases that expire in, I don't know, in decades probably. So I think this is one of the reasons why many companies are calling back their employees because they struggle with empty offices. They get a lot of pressure from stakeholders and from other entities because they have the leases going on. So I think there is a lot of change going on, but it still needs a big shift a little bit in the mindsets. Why? Because otherwise organizations will really face troubles finding great people. Of course, we do see that the war for talent has been ongoing for the past decade. But now that we have even the possibility of working remotely with any company across the globe, it becomes even more difficult if you do not allow for flexibility and autonomy.
Yep. Yep. Thank you for sharing that. What tools and platforms do you recommend for digital communication and collaboration in a remote work setting?
Well, I think many organizations, I'm just telling you out of the experience of my projects. So many organizations that I work with, they are on a Microsoft, they are working in a Microsoft Teams environment. For
Okay.
me, personal Microsoft Teams, the moment that you work with external partners becomes like really, really difficult. And even in an internal setup, very often organizations struggle because unfortunately it's not the most easy to handle platform in my experience. What I see, what many smaller organizations use for communication, they work or with Trello, Asana, or Monday as a project management tool, and they connect it more with a communication tool like Slack, for example. In organizations where there is no problem using WhatsApp, I would always recommend to have a channel like WhatsApp or Telegram for informal communication. But even that, you can use it, or you can have it on Slack and have this social interaction channel or the team channel or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So these are the channels that I would always recommend. Also in the teams that I work with, we work with Trello, Slack, and WhatsApp. So we have those three channels in place. Even though, to be very fair, I must say that we work with G Suite. I must say that we don't really use properly Trello. we figure out for our work, the way we work, it works pretty okay if we use Slack and WhatsApp for the informal communication and Slack for the formal communication. And we have for all the channels and for all our communication in general, we have rules set up on for what messages we're using, what channel, and how long we expect to be the response time, for example, in all the channels that we use.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing.
I
Yeah, yeah,
think
go ahead.
I think really Sagar, just to pick up on that, I think clarity in informal in communication is very important, and clarity means to have this kind of clear manual on what channel we're using, for what messages, how do we communicate on those channels. So for example, thread communication, to communicate in threads on Slack is like essential, and I see that many organizations are struggling with that for a month until everybody onboards to a really well structured thread communication. And I also believe that it's important to set those response times that we want, or that we expect people to adhere to. That's also important, just to add up on this part here.
Absolutely, clarity is the thing, I think. And actually what you said is also important, even if you're off site, but then if you're remotely working, then it becomes even more important. So thank you for sharing that perspective. So circling back to the previous question where we were discussing that organizations been asking teams to come back. So let's say there are some downsides of remote working, and then how can, if team is really wanting to go remote, how can they address it proactively?
If a team, you mean like a team goes remote by their own decision, or the company goes remote? What do you mean exactly?
So I meant that, I mean, the companies, they are asking employees to come back. The reasons could be, as you rightly said, the leasing, but there could be other reasons. Be it, I mean, maybe structurally they're unable to manage their teams, or they're unable to, reach a productivity level that they are expecting. So how that can be addressed proactively?
Well, I think the moment that you decide to become a virtual organization, or even to allow for virtual or remote distributed working days that you didn't have before, I think it's important to start with clarifications on what that means, to set up clear guidelines on how employees and managers can do that. And it needs to be done really throughout. I have the experience that when it's only done partly in an organization, that very often organizations are struggling. But if you do it throughout the whole organization, it becomes much easier for everybody to also then be on a similar experience level. What I think is is very valuable here is that you also run short workshops, that you do quick check-ins with managers and support them in that process. When we talk, like you were saying, how can you proactively help them? I think it's also for each team. It's on their agenda. They have to work on a sort of a setup, rules, guidelines on how they will work together differently. So each team needs to start a team process as well. What and how this virtual setup will affect their teamwork, what will be changing, and how they will be addressing it. So I think this is also very important at this.
Thank you. So what advice you have for remote leaders to keep their remote teams motivated and engaged?
I think engagement and motivation is not necessarily something that is only connected with a fun team environment, but I think motivation and engagement is connected with clarity and purpose. So the moment that a leader, a manager provides clarity about communicate, or provides an environment which is very clear about how, where to communicate, what is the purpose, what is our mission or vision as a team, what are the different roles that we have in our organization. I think when we have these aspects covered, then I believe people will be more motivated and more engaged. So I think this is here of utmost importance. For this, again, we need to have a Teams manual. We need to have a clear communication guideline. We need to consider how we as a team might need to change our processes in order to be effective.
Okay. So just for the viewers, Barbara is helping her baby. So thank you, Barbara, for still being with us and sharing your insights. Um, can you also help us understand? You made a very important point on the environment, right? And what are some of the areas, be it team members or remote managers or remote leaders, can look at on creating a very very healthy and a positive environment? Your thoughts there.
Mhm. When it comes about a healthy environment, I think we need to have an environment that is psychologically safe for everybody, which means psychological safety is an environment where everybody feels like they can contribute without being judged, they can make errors without being punished, they can speak up without being looked weirdly at, right?
Yeah.
And if we create an environment where people feel psychologically safe to contribute, we will always have an environment that will be more innovative and creative, because we will tap into the full potential of our employees, because people will contribute more.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does it mean if we're a psychologically safe environment organization? It means also that people will be less stressed out, right? Because there will be more well-being, more, there will be more security for them, and they don't have to feel stressed about speaking up, about making an error, about contributing. And this reduces a lot the general pain when it comes to organizational culture. When we think about a remote first or virtual environment where people are healthy, that is a healthy environment, it also means that we are clear that asynchronous communication helps you to achieve a great harmony in your work, which means that you as a leader need to role model. What does it mean to be a great asynchronous communicator? Why is that so? Think about asynchronous communication in such a way that it allows you to adapt the work around your necessities of communication. What does it mean? You don't have to be stressed and to look every 2 minutes to your emails, as 95% of the people that I work with are still doing.
Yeah.
But embracing asynchronous communication means that I usually check in twice a day on my emails. Some teams have a rule to check in once a day on the emails. If there is something urgent coming up, you need to have a protocol installed, of course, for these urgent things, right? But in general, you should take the stress out of the communication purposes. If I look at many colleagues that I work with, they come to a meeting and say, "Dear God, I have been full of meetings for the past 3 days." So most of the people feel stressed because they run from one meeting to the other without necessarily contributing in those meetings. So very often they're just there listening to something that they are marginally concerned, or really that they have marginal involvement in. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
this really helps to be a healthy team. What is important is that you, as a team leader, and all team members really are aware of that and model that behavior. If a team leader answers all the messages after or 1 minute that they float into the inbox or to the channel, whatever it is, then the team leader is displaying and modeling a behavior that might not help to really embrace asynchronous communication, right? Because even though it's nice maybe that I get a prompt answer, an immediate reply from my team leader, it might tell me, oh, he or she's always online because he or she wants to check the messages. So I'd rather do the same, right? And I think this is really important. When it becomes also, when it's also about a healthy work environment, I think we need to consider and be clear about how do we take care of each other as a team,
Hmm.
as a virtual team. How do we take care of each other when it comes to checking in? Do we do that on a regular basis? Do we have, I don't know, do we have it on the team agenda once a month to see how are people doing? How do we check in on our well-being during the 101s? So 101 meetings with your managers, they should always be like it's one of the strongest and one of the best leadership instruments that we have. And it's so underused in many organizations. But also in the 101s, not only check in on the how the work is going or what struggles the employees facing when it comes to work environment, but also check in on their well-being in an honest and really in an honest way. Exactly.
Thank you for sharing that. This is more, I mean, I'm really happy to share that this is coming across as a master class with Dr. Barbara, because the way you are sharing answers, you're addressing to the core, which is which is inspiring. Thank you for sharing that perspective. What advice do you have for organizations that are just starting to explore new ways of working, and they're just starting to be remote first? What suggestions you have for them?
um, well, I think those who are just starting to work in a remote first or in a virtual setup, I think it's important that they call in experts that support them in the process. I do
Yeah.
see so many people starting to work on a remote work setup by themselves, by, I don't know, watching YouTube videos or reading through blogs, which is fantastic because there's a lot of super valuable knowledge out there. But I myself, as a business owner, can tell you that I saved so much time when I hired a business coach. Why? Because even though I run my own business, I might not be and even though I listen to a lot of business owners, entrepreneurial podcasts, it just took me much, much longer than just hiring my business coach. Thank you so much, Vasco. You changed my business life, really. And it made it much, much faster. So think about how you as an organization would be able to thrive if you, from an earlier moment on, really work together with consultants, with experts in the realm of virtual work, and support your teams properly to thrive in this new environment as well.
Just have a follow-up question here. How do you, or how did you identify the right business coach? Also, how did one identify that that this is the right partner or a coach I am working with?
To be very fair, I just took the recommendation from a colleague that I very much appreciate. So another business owner that I very much look up to. I learned a lot from her. She talked about her business coach. She's in a similar business than I am, and that is when I contacted Vasco and I got in touch. And after the first four sessions, because most coaches, so we got to know each other in a get to know each other session, and then we started the first month working together on a weekly basis, and we just felt the connection because we were both very straightforward, very organized, and that is when it became very clear to me that this is my business coach. Which doesn't mean that there wouldn't be a coach out there that would be a better fit even for me. Who knows? Maybe yes. But I found with Vasco really somebody who is straight to the point. He's from a Scrum background. He's very well organized. He has a lot of experience as a business owner himself. And he's always coming up with the right question to trigger my reflection on the processes and problems that I'm facing or challenging or that I want to rework.
Thank you for sharing that experience. That really helps. So how do you see the relationship between learning and working in this new era? Like, there's so much of content out here, as you rightly said. So how do you see this relationship?
I do believe that the changes that we have been seeing in the past 15, 20 years when it comes to learning, it was much more about having workplace integrated learning processes implemented. What does that mean? We need to think about how we can support our team members, our employees, that when they access learning content, that they are also able to use the material and transfer the content as soon as possible or immediately to the workplace. That means that I think learning for me very often is even more effective if we have self-paced content like videos, podcasts, readings, whatsoever, that is combined with social peer groups, learning out loud circles, and coaching processes that helps a lot, much more to foster learning transfer than, for example, as I've ever seen in an 8-day full training where people come to a beautiful headquarter and learning center. They have a great lunch, but they leave in the evening without really sort of connecting more deeply on the content or with each other afterwards. And we do know out of research that only 2 out of 12 participants really use and apply what they learned in their daily life. And that's a horrible number. 2 out of 12. So, rethinking learning means that we combine in presence with virtual, that we use spaced learning, meaning smaller chunks of content. For example, using your webinars or your podcast as a source of inspiration on a certain topic, and then reflect through reflection questions with a peer group or with the manager or with the team or with throughout a learning out loud circle to enhance learning transfer. And these are the changes that I would wish to see even much, much more in our today's workplaces.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. Just wanted to know, how do you manage your work life balance, work life integration?
Well, Sagar, I do prefer to call it work-life harmony because I think
Hmm.
it's not always a balance and it can change. It's not necessarily for me an integration because often work takes over. That's why I don't call it integration. I call it workplace harmony, which for me means also that it can look for everybody different. And it can look different for me this week, next week, or maybe the first half of the year and the second half of the year, 2023. So harmony for me means that in my case, work does not take over my private life, because for me, my family, of course, I have 2 boys, 1 baby, and a bigger one of 2.5 years, are very important, and they require also me to be present and not be working all the time, of course. I posted a few weeks ago a LinkedIn post about with the saying, and we have seen the quote all over LinkedIn in the past years. And the only people in 20 years who will remember that you worked on the weekends will be your children. And that is so important to remember, that there is more to us as only being the go-to professional expert. Whether it's your family, whether it is a hobby that you have, whether it is, I don't know, your pets, but there is more to you than being only a professional. But I also know for myself, and being a mom, I love being a mom, and my 2 boys are fantastic. But I also know for me, being a mom, being an entrepreneur, being a wife, I was always clear that I never see myself being 0% a professional. That is also why I kept working. I had very good pregnancies. I have very good boys that are very good sleepers. So I was always able to continue working even very shortly after delivering my babies. Harmony means for me to be aware that different situations require maybe different input and you get maybe different output. But harmony means that that you, and in your situation, you feel comfortable with how many hours you work and with how many hours you are with yourself, with your family, with your friends, with your pets. But research shows that if work takes over consistently over many, many years, that it's harming your personal life.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. So how do one build connections, do networking in a remote setup, considering this allows everyone to interact with people from various geographies? So can you share your process, your learnings there?
Since 20, well, my network was already pre-pandemic very, very global because I was part of many global NGOs.
Hmm.
Theatre Europa, which is the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research. And throughout my involvement with theater, I had a very, very global and international network. What I feel happened for many of us during the pandemic and after the pandemic is that everybody's global network like exploded,
Yeah.
but I think not everybody's global network became a meaningful network with really strong relationships. Why? Because you need to be much more intentional on how you network with people if you are in a virtual context. If I just think about conferences, I went to so many conferences over the 10 years as a researcher, probably 10 conferences a year or 8 conferences a year, which also increased a lot my network. But if you do not follow up with people and engage in more in-depth dialogue afterwards, people will not be remembering you, right? But still, as you connected at an in-presence conference, the bond is different. What I see, and I did a great interview about virtual networking with one of my LinkedIn Live guests as well. He always said that you need to be very purposeful before, during, and after the event. And
Yes.
that, of course, takes a lot of time. It takes much more time than when you were going to an in presence conference. Um, when you are at the virtual event, for example, what something that you can do to stand out and to connect properly with people is to engage in meaningful panel conversations, to show up through comments, through the chat, to be present so that people recognize you. And one funny small tip is also when you log into the conference platform, if it's a virtual conference, for example, you can help yourself to stand out by using, for example, an emoji in front of your name, because you see that very often there is a name list with, like, I don't know what, hundreds of names, but your name will be the name where there is an emoji in front, and people will immediately be like, oh, who's that? So that's just to stand out in a crowd of many, many people in a virtual event.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. I think it's great to see how how you connected the dots, how everything is like falling into place. I mean, you as a researcher, it has really helped you. And I also see that just before the pandemic, you turned remote, and pandemic came. Of course, it has its own, it has its own effects. But then, it turned world to go virtual, and I think you have a lot to share. Maybe we'll have to do one more podcast, because I have like list of questions based on the answers that you're sharing. One final question I have for you is that, can you share some strategies for ensuring data security and privacy in remote working environments?
hmm Well, to be very honest, I'm not a data security or IT expert, but I think also here it becomes a lot about, it has a lot to do with awareness. But for details about data security, definitely I can look through my network and provide you with a name who is much more fit to talk about that.
Sure, sure, sure. No, I just wanted your perspective. Like, how do you ensure, like, because you're managing clients or managing teams, just a general perspective. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I think we always, and we do see that there is a lot of awareness from companies when it comes to data security, particularly in the use of Microsoft Teams. That's also why we have been seeing a huge increase on how many companies are using Teams, as it is a very secure. It's a very secure, GDPR compliant, and also very holistic platform that we
Okay.
see, even though it is very complicated to manage, honestly. What I do is we ensure that we always use a safe web browser. We use a safe storage place for our clients where we manage the files. And of course, we train our trainers on how to use the tools that the company is requesting us to work with.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. It was wonderful having you, and listening to your listening to your insights. And before we end this podcast, do you have any of closing comments for our viewers? It would be great, and also share how they would, if they would like to reach out to you, how they can connect to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sounds great. Thank you so much. Well, Sagar, I think my last comment would be the future of work is choice and autonomy. So I think it's really important that we as organizations um, remember that and continue working on our processes to support an autonomous, self-led workplace. The future of work is choice. And if you want to reach out with me, I'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn, which is also, you can see me here in the event, but it's also linkedin.com/Barbara CV, and you will find me already there. So looking forward to meeting you all out there and connecting with you.
Thank you once again. By the way, I checked your website. It's really nicely made. So just thought of sharing that with you. I read your profile. That really helped me prepare for this podcast. And thank you, viewers, for joining us and listening to this virtual global leadership podcast. And keep watching. Thank you very much.
Thank you.